Well, the Grieve, that's not a Lewis word. When I worked in Orkney, I was telling stories in several primary schools in Orkney. One of them in Rosie, the island of Rosie, and every second person in Rosie was called Grieve. And of course, the poet Hugh MacDiarmid, his name was Grieve, and the word really means farm, manager, foreman, the main man on the farm, the one who really gets the work sorted. That's the Grieve. But I know the story from a manuscript collection gathered by Donald Morrison, who was born in the mid to late 1700s. And he was a cooper, a barrel maker, cooper, engaged in the huge herring industry in Stornoway at that time. So at that time there had been a huge international trade, ships going to the Baltic, and of course stories passed along the sea routes. So in addition to him transcribing oral tales from Lewis and Harris, there are all these journeys by sea along the sea route. But this is a story which he says relates to Callanish Farm. Now you might have heard of Callanish from the stones, the standing stones, but there's something much more unusual in Callanish. Something in Lewis anyway, very unusual in Lewis, to get green ground. My friends on the mainland always wind me up and say, you don't know that colour, Lewis, man. We call it green. You only know brown. But there is green in Lewis, and Callanish Farm was quite a prosperous farm. And they also wind me up and say, don't look up, Lewis, man. We call that the sun. You never see that, but it does shine in Lewis, and I'm happy to say it's been shining in Lewis constantly for the last couple of months in a northerly airstream, when the rest of the country is having thunderstorms and rain and everything. But at Callanish, at the farm, the farmer is needing a new man, a new Grieve, an important decision. So he goes asking his friends, people he trusts, for advice, and the same name keeps coming up. And he thinks, I'll need to have a glass of beer with this man. So this man comes to the kitchen table, they have a glass of ale together, and the farmer says, speak up for yourself then, man. What can you do for me and my farm? Oh, I don't like to blow my own trumpet, the man says. That's why you're here. Pours him another glass. Speak up for yourself. Well, he says, since you ask, they tell me there's 3 things I can do. What are they? Well, they say I'm good at keeping the Bairns away from the fire. Well, that's not what the farmer was expecting to hear. I think you might tell me the second thing, he said. Well, since you ask, he said, I can sleep through a storm. What? Well, maybe we'll just move on to the third. Well, since you ask, I can gather your true friends to a feast, he said. Now, this is not what the farmer was expecting. He didn't know what to make of this man, but he trusted the people that advised him, and he said, look, can we give it a season? Can we have a trial of a season, see how we get on? Aye, that'll suit me fine, the new man says. Well, it's a spring, and in Lewis, quite early on, it's the time for the peat cutting. That's the fuel for the winter. It's a very important job, and the new Grieve is not in a hurry to get started. The farmer's getting anxious, but he's biting his lips, doesn't say a thing, and eventually the Grieve leads the workers out, and the irons get going, and it's a good going job. There's banter. Peat cutting's easy. It's just a simple technique. You know what's difficult? It's keeping up conversation on religious philosophy, politics, sex, everything you're not supposed to talk about in the house, and not cut anyone's hand off in the process. That's what's difficult. But everyone's yarning, and the peats are coming out like slabs of gingerbread, neat, landing, tidy, and the farmer looks, and it's been a good day's work, and the peats are dry the same time as everybody else's, but the Grieve has said, I like to wait until the oil rises in the ground. That's why we started a wee bit later. But they're dry just the same, and the night they brought them home, there was a raw east wind, And we have this phrase in the islands, a lazy wind. Do you know why? It's too damn lazy to go around you. It goes right through your boards. That kind of a wind. So somebody says, try these new peats. Now we've got all these words for different stages of peat, from kep, fat, all the way down. But on the bottom, it's a curran. And that's the hard, black ones that are good heat value. Throw a few of these currants on the fire, and they do. See the heat that comes off them. The blaze that comes off these peats. Everyone's moving their chairs back from the fire, and then the farmer notices the Bairns that have been toasting their noses at the fire have moved back too, and then he remembers, what did that man say he could do? Keep the Bairns away from the fire. There's maybe more to him than I thought. Now, at the planting early in the year, it was the same. I think we'll wait till there's some heat in the ground, the Grieve says. And then he plants. And the harvest yield, you'll never hear a farmer anywhere, either side of the pond, say they've had a good year. You'll certainly not hear it in the island of Lewis from any crofter or farmer. But if it's not been the best, it's not been a bad one. And there's a good harvest. And our man is away with folk. He goes round the field and he says, now that's a fine stook of hay. There's nothing wrong with that, but if you don't mind, this is a job I like to do myself. And he secures it, ties his own knot. That pile of barley, that rig of barley is just as fine as I've seen, but if you don't mind, I'll just tie the stook myself. And every bit of that harvest he looks at and he ties, and the knot is his own. And that night a wind came in from the Atlantic, Loch Rogue, Callanish, and folk are out trying to hold onto their roofs, trying to catch their haystacks from blowing away. And nearly everyone in Callanish is out struggling. But not everyone, as you might have guessed where the Grieve is. He's in his bed, and the farmer is not best pleased, goes banging at the door, am I paying you to lie in your bed, man? And the Grieve says, have you had a look at my harvest? The farmer inspects it, and there's not one coil of hay, not one stook of barley moved, not one blade. And then he remembers, what did that man say he could do? I can sleep through a storm. Well, it came to the last one, and the farmer said, now that one I understood. The table is near bending with produce. We've got all we could want to eat. We've got venison from the hill to go with it. We've got mutton, aran cork, oat cakes, aran yorna, barley bread. We've got everything you'd want. Soft cheese, hard cheese, cream, crowdy. Now go to the north to Barbas. Go all the way down the west side. Tell every Shirach west sider we have plenty and we're sharing it, and they're very welcome to Callanish Farm, and I'll take you at your word, because that one I understood. But that's not what the Grieve says at all. He goes into the first house and he says, poor year, I'll not hide it from you. And we've had a bit of trouble in that last storm. We've lost a bit of a roof. But we're going to have a gathering all the same. And if you can bring what you can, and if you can possibly bring a little bit of hay to help repair a roof, that would be better still. Now the farmer is waiting for all the hordes to arrive, and they're not coming. And he sees a handful of folk. And he's amazed to find they're all struggling with as much hay as they can carry over the shoulder. And he says to the Grieve, I'll need a word with you now before our few guests arrive. That's the only thing I understood. You couldn't have bothered your backside, man. Says the Grieve, I didn't promise you a multitude of people. What I said I would do is gather your true friends to a feast. And these people came expecting nothing, just expecting to help. And the farmer saw it right away. The cork came out of the bottle. We won't be requiring this then, gentlemen and ladies. And what a night they had. A few more folk came and they gathered and they ate and they talked, and I don't think any of them went to their beds that night in Callanish Farm. That's the story of the Wise Grieve, recorded, transcribed from spoken language by Donald Morrison and very